firstly, I'd like to be invited for your December luncheon, I think. Sounds enjoyable. But we're really kind of excited to do this. We haven't been able, obviously, to teach in person in quite some time. So mainly for Sarah and I, the fall and the spring are kind of our two busy seasons for us, and we get tons of field trips that come to the gardens and experience kind of different levels of environmental education. So usually most of our programs are in the K-8 range when it comes to kids, but we haven't really had the opportunity to do that. So we have been kind of delving into this weird virtual realm, just like you guys have as well. So we've done some Zoom meetings like this. We made a YouTube channel, which is just another whole world of figuring out how to do virtual stuff. So we have an Airlie Gardens Environmental Education YouTube channel. We have some videos on there, and I could certainly send it to you guys if you have interest in it. Some of them are kind of goofy and geared towards kids. Some of them are some live programs that we've done and we've uploaded to our YouTube channel as well. And so every Tuesday we go live on our Facebook page and we kind of pick a random topic in the garden and focus on that. So we've really ventured into an odd world of education, just like any teacher has as well, whether they're public or informal education. So it's really enjoyable, and I appreciate you guys asking us to chat with you today. We are going to focus a good bit on Airlie's history. Is kind of crazy, to be honest with you. It's a lot of dates, it's a lot of information. There's a lot of conflicting information, but we'll kind of hit the high points of it. I think most of you have mentioned that you have all been here before, with the exception of, I can't see everybody, but I did see one hand. Jojo, that has not been here before. We are open. So we're open every day from 9 to 5. And it really is a garden for the season. So I was talking to Sue before we really kind of got started here. Soon enough, our camellias are really what's going to be on display. And we have quite a few camellias, and we'll get into the history of some of those as well. And there's kind of some estimated camellia ages that are over 100. So we have quite a few species of very large camellias that are going to be in bloom here from really now through, depending on our temperatures, even into March. So they're really beautiful, and I definitely encourage you guys to come out, especially if you're trying to avoid other people. The winter time is usually kind of when we're our slowest anyways. I will say with COVID, things have changed for us here in our operations with the garden. So if you were to come visit today, we don't sell any tickets on site. Everything we do is pre-purchased tickets. So we try and limit our ticket agent at the front desk from kind of interacting with anybody. And we moved our gift shop into our classroom space. So now it's kind of a big space since we're not really utilizing any indoor spaces beyond that. And then we do ask that people wear masks, especially if they're within 6 feet of any other people. Although if you're walking the garden and you're in what you consider your bubble or whomever that may be for you, and there's nobody else around you, you could certainly take your mask off. So one of the beauties about Airlie is that we have remained open with the exception of 2 weeks during the pandemic. And to be honest, it's been weird, but it's kind of been nice in terms of staff as well. Like, we have a small sense of normalcy of being able to come to work, unlike a lot of people who are utilizing the virtual world to work now. And it's nice to be able to see people come out and enjoy the space throughout the summertime and now coming into the winter time as well. Some things that we are doing right now is we are doing our bird hikes. I spoke to Sue about this as well. Our bird hikes are the second Wednesday of each month, starting at 8 a.m. And we work with Jill from Wild Bird and Garden, so she comes out as well. If you've ever been to Wild Bird and Garden, either her Southport store or her store on Oleander. Sorry, I was also reading. I'm reading some of the comments as well. But we'll cruise through those at the end there. But Yeah, so if you're ever interested in coming out, we actually open an hour early, and then we kind of tour the gardens with you and identify birds. It's a really cool time frame. So we actually just did our monthly bird hike yesterday, and we saw 32 different species of birds. So this is a cool spot too because of the variance of habitat that you have here. We have a freshwater lake, which we'll talk about. We border a brackish water creek. We have open lawn spaces. We have forested spaces. So we actually have a really awesome biodiversity of birds. And if you are an avid birder or you've been on a website called eBird before, we have a huge list of what we've seen. We've been keeping track of these birds and these bird hikes in the last like 10 years. So all that information is on eBirds. We also have this really awesome data set to know what's been here, rarities that have been here, things that we can look for during migrations and things like that. So bird hikes are back on. Everybody wears masks when we're in the groups, and it is all outside. We're not doing anything, of course indoors. So that's kind of the only program that we're currently offering. And then the next big thing that's coming up, and if anyone is a member or has purchased a ticket, we are doing our Christmas lights this year, or our holiday lights, excuse me. So for Enchanted Airlie, we've changed that up as well. We want people to be able to come out and enjoy the gardens in a safe space and be outside and have something to do for the holidays. A lot of stuff is getting canceled, understandably so. And we're really working to try and keep it a safe environment. We are requiring masks unless you're eating or drinking. We're not offering any food or beverage here, but you can certainly bring it on site. We're not doing Santa, unfortunately, for all of the kids, because it's just not an easy thing to do right now. And then again, we've moved our gift shop into a much larger space than it would normally be in, and kind of monitoring the number of people that are indoors. We also have minimized the time for people to come. So usually it would be a 2-hour time frame, and we would have over 250 car loads of people come in per time slot. We're not doing that this year. We've limited it to hour-long time slots and have greatly reduced the number of cars that can actually come in. So that's going to limit the number of people that are going to be around and walking through the space. So if you are coming to Enchanted this year, or interested in coming to Enchanted, we're doing everything we can to make it an enjoyable and safe experience as well. So I said I was going to do a short, which didn't seem so short, but just kind of a little bit about what we're doing here at the gardens right now. But now I'll share my screen with you guys. We have a little bit of a variety of history information to share with you. So first and foremost, most people think that Airlie was once a plantation, and that is not true at all. The three main names, actually, Sue, can you give me a thumbs up if everything looks okay? Or if anybody can unmute and just let me know if you can see this all right. Yeah? Okay, cool. Thanks, Lily. So a very abbreviated version, or we'd be here for a really long time. So we have docents that lead history tours that can be up to 2 hours. I promise I won't keep you that long. And to be honest, I'm not as knowledgeable as some of our docents about our history. But Airlie was never a plantation. The four main names that you're going to hear are the Wright family, the Latimer family, the Joneses, and the Bradleys. And so you're going to hear those names a handful of times as we're kind of going through the history.
Alyssa, so, excuse me for interrupting you, but you can you make it full screen?
Oh, yeah. Hide presenter view. There you go. Sorry. Yeah, I don't think that. Oh. Better?
Yes, perfect. Thank you.
Cool. Sorry, I was in presenter view. So those are the four main names that you're really going to hear with us. Yeah. And so if you've been to Airlie, the one main thing that everybody knows about Airlie is the Airlie oak. And that is what this picture of this tree is. This is a live oak, I'm sure as most of you all are familiar with. And we kind of base its age off of this year here, 1545. We estimate it to be in the 400 to 500 age range, and we've been saying that for quite some time. We really don't know. We haven't had the tree formally aged. It's very much so based off of its width around, based off of the canopy itself and its height. But we base it off of saying, all right, so the property really dates back to this main time frame at 1545. The oak itself, and I'm going to show you, we took a quick video. The oak itself is really a magnificent tree. And I took a nice video yesterday, or Sarah and I did. No? Moving? Not moving? What's up? Oh, man. Well, guys, we inserted videos, and now you can't play them. Well, you'll get to see some photos, I guess, then. So with the oak, with Florence, Dorian, Isaias, even this last hurricane that we had, man, this tree has weathered some serious storms. Florence really changed kind of what this tree looked like. It lost some branches. A lot of the sister oaks, which we deem the oaks around the outer portion of the lawn to this one, also lost some branches. And it looked a lot different. You could really see the stress on the tree. It definitely did a leaf push during that time. It looked pretty naked, as it didn't even have any moss on it because everything really blew off of it. But the oak is doing pretty good. We actually had some arborists come out and just kind of take a look at the tree itself, take a look at some of those sister oaks around it, just to kind of see what the health of the tree was doing. And really it's doing quite well, which is awesome to hear. The nature of this tree, of course, is to live on our coastal environments and adaptations to survive these storms that we have. So the Airlie oak is really magnificent. It's near and dear to our hearts here, so we take care of it as we must. We always have had a fence, not a fence, but a perimeter around the outside of it, so people aren't walking really underneath it and climbing on it and things like that. And then it's really just a solid focal point of our lawn. And that's where most of our events take place. That you can't really beat that backdrop by any means. So the oak is really one of the prominent features and has been here, for years and years and years. I'll try and get these videos to work. If not, I could probably pull out of presentation mode and we'll be able to take a look at them, but we could certainly do that at the end. If you've been to the gardens, in the very center of our space, there is a chapel. And that chapel is the Mount Lebanon Chapel. We actually don't own that property. We don't maintain that property. Adjacent to it is a graveyard. And that goes back to Thomas Wright, or Dr. Thomas Henry Wright. And the Wrights were the original kind of owners of some of these parcels of land. Really, a lot of these parcels of land were owned by those four main families that I was talking about at the beginning there. And so the chapel is actually deeded out to St. James Episcopal Church. And so that's maintained totally separate of the gardens itself. It's a beauty in and of itself. If you're walking the gardens, you're able to walk up and look at it, and you're able to get to move around their property, but it is totally owned and operated separately of the garden and the county. So that happened way back in the 1800s. So that's very much so beyond kind of what we do here at the garden. But it's a beautiful space. It's open. It's a functioning church. Lots of ceremonies there. They always do an Easter service there. So people that attend that church, they actually enter from a separate gate. They enter through our side gate that's right across the way from the chapel. And they enter right through there and go directly there and park at the church. So it's just totally separate of the gardens itself. But I definitely encourage you, if you haven't been or haven't walked up to the gardens, it's not usually open that you can go into the chapel, but you can see all around it. And they just recently did some construction there as well. I will say that for the chapel themselves, they lost with Florence. The gardens here lost about 250 trees. And then even in their own property, it really looks bare in comparison to what it's looked like prior to Florence. Between Florence, Dorian, and Isaias, they themselves have lost tons of trees as well. So it's much more evident from our walking paths that the chapel is actually there. But anyway, so that was deeded out, totally separate by Thomas Ray. And here is where we get into the bulk of our history. So our property was originally owned by Sarah and Pembroke Jones. So Sarah Green, that was her maiden name, and Pembroke Jones. Now they say Keeping Up with the Joneses was based off of Pembroke and his family of the Joneses. But they purchased about a little under 50 acres of land, including an inn that really bordered Bradley Creek. And that inn had 39 rooms in total. And if you've been here, we have a small model of that inn right at the front building. So it's actually right outside this door that's to my left over here. And it's a small model of what that building actually used to look like. The goal was at one point to own and operate it as an inn. So they developed a company. It was called the Seaside Park Development Company. And then over time, when that purchase came through, Pembroke signed it as the president of the Seaside Park Improvement Company. All right, so they kind of switched it over there. And the goal at one point was to operate that as a functional inn. Now that never really occurred. And eventually that space really turned into what the Airlie house was. And so that's where they hosted tons of events. They had people come down and visit. And all of Pembroke's money came from the railroad business. Most of the money for most of these families that lived here all developed from the railroad systems. So Sarah and Pembroke eventually married. It's worth noting that Sarah also had money of her own. So she was wealthy and her family was wealthy on her own, separate of Pembroke, which comes into play here in the fact that she actually purchased outright herself with her own money from the Seaside Improvement Company for $1,250 another parcel of land. And so in total, between that first purchase and this one, so for $6,250, they got 155 acres of land, and that includes some of that landfall area. So that this whole parcel, these tracts, all kind of come together to build that. Now, Pembroke's Lodge, it was called the Pembroke Park Lodge. That was over by landfall, and I think it eventually burnt down. And then the Airlie house itself was here bordering the creek. Now, we don't have, it's actually just on the other side of the fence here on our property. It's on the other side of the fence where the original frame of that house was, or where the original footprint of that house was. The name Airlie, a lot of people come here and like, Arlie? No, Airlie. It's Scottish, and it's from Pembroke's origin. And then kind of the connection came between Wilmington and Wrightsville with that construction of the Wrightsville Turnpike in the late 1800s. So really all of these purchases occurred in 3 or 4 years, kind of all melded together. And then that's when things really changed and the garden itself really started to develop, because Sarah purchased that parcel of land herself. And so she wanted it to be pretty and look pretty and have that, as Sue kind of discussed earlier, and I think this is kind of where it comes from, in my opinion, kind of have that romanticized feel to it. So that original kind of feeling really came from Sarah developing this space. Sarah hired Rudolph Topol to kind of start developing the gardens itself. So the pergola, if you've been here, which is this top photo right here, that's original to the garden. They dammed a creek, which is how we have the lake in the center. They dammed a creek called Church's Creek. And so that creek was dammed and created an 8-acre freshwater lake right in the center of the garden itself. So Airlie Gardens, as it stands right now, is 67 acres. 8 of that in the middle is a freshwater lake. Just a super side note from the history is that we've actually done a ton of work on this lake in recent years. So in the last 3 years, we've completed what we've kind of called our Airlie Gardens Stormwater Management Master Plan. And the reason we've done that is because the quality of the lake itself, the water quality, had dipped very low. So we had to add aerators. If you've been here, you'll notice bubbles out in the water. Those are aerators to increase the oxygen levels within the lake. Most recently, we dredged the lake to give it depth. At its deepest points, the lake itself was only 3 feet deep. And so really what that causes is higher temperatures, right? So over time, we had sediment buildup. We had organic matter, of course, kind of moving into the water as well, just from the surrounding trees and things like that. And so that decrease in the depth with the combination of our temperatures and the combination of the nutrients flow that is naturally occurring within the lake system, and then also from runoff coming into the lake, increased our algal blooms, caused fish kills, increased the temperatures. So really what's happening is that level of the lake doesn't hold the right amount, or doesn't really hold oxygen so much anymore. So the colder the water, the better it holds oxygen. So in the last 2 years, we've dredged a channel that's 10 feet wide and 5 feet deep from one side to the other. And we've created 2 extra deep pockets that are about 10 feet deep and 7 feet wide. So that creates a kind of a safe haven for some of our fish species. That also creates a better area for nutrients to drop off, because you have a much longer water column for these things to drop off, as opposed to a really heavy nutrient load that causes those algal blooms. And then the last, well, technically it was the first thing we did, but as you exit the garden from our exit gate, there's actually a really small stream that we teach a lot of our programs from that bleeds into the lake itself. And we created a big deep pool at the front of that because it connects to some of the runoff from Airlie Road. And then we kind of weaved that stream. So there's a lot of sediment that's going to settle in that stream first before it's moving off and into the lake. And the biggest reason that we did that, aside from nobody wants to come here and see a fish kill or green water, is that this water empties and outflows into Bradley Creek. And we'll get to Bradley Creek here in 1 second. But if you were to look, Bradley Creek and Hewlett's Creek in the city of Wilmington are severely polluted. So we wanted to do everything that we could here to increase a better water quality exiting out into Bradley Creek as well. But Bradley Creek has had problems for quite some time, and you'll see why in just 1 second. So big side note, but something that we've recently completed here as well. So anyways, so Sarah builds the pergola, she hires Rudolph, and that's when we're really starting to get thousands of azaleas being planted, longleaf pines, magnolias, camellias. That's when really everything's starting to take place in the development of this beautiful tract of land. So all of this is really occurring around that Airlie house area, not in Pembroke's area. So Pembroke's was more of like a hunting lodge that they utilized that for, and Sarah hosted parties, gave out these lavish gifts. I think she gave watches to the men and diamonds to the women. I mean, so they hosted these really lavish parties for people to come down. When you have 39 rooms, there's really no problem hosting anybody. And so she started to develop this garden. And so Topol will stay at the garden here and developed this space for the better part of his life, or the latter part of his life, which is pretty cool. I'm going to try and play this, but I would only assume this is not going to work. It tries. So nonetheless, this is a view of our lake. And the road that we're standing on is what we call the causeway. It was actually originally built as a wooden bridge. And then when the Corbett family owned it, that's what Sarah's going to talk about, it was vandalized and I think eventually had burnt down. So now it's an actual solid path that you can walk on here. One of the notable features of this kind of space, besides the lake itself, of course, is along each side of the causeway are ladybanks roses, which have historically always been here. So what's considered a thornless rose, but even it does have really itty bitty teeny tiny thorns. But ladybanks roses all kind of along that causeway space. And then if we were to turn to our right, that's where the pergola would be, on the other side of the lake there. So here, I wish this video would work, but you can kind of start to see it here. We have our camellias starting to bloom. So two main species of our camellias are the sasanquas and the japonicas. So we're starting to get them blooming now. And again, like I was saying before, when Rudolph was developing this, I mean, we've got camellias here that are hundreds of years old, which is really cool. I mean, these are things that were originally planted. Not saying that we haven't added camellias, but these are very large, lush camellias. Their bloom is really spectacular. So if you can get out here during the winter time, I would really recommend it. January is kind of that sweet spot for me because you're going to see both really in bloom, which is nice, and a variance of colors from reds to whites to kind of pinks and mixes in between. And so this space here that you're looking at with these gravel paths that are lined with the liriope, that is our camellia garden. And so when they originally were developing this space, there's a lot of these kind of winding, moving paths. And so that this camellia garden really kind of centrals in and is really evident in this particular space. So tons of camellias, a lot of really large oaks within this space as well. And you just kind of wind through these paths and you'll really kind of see that. So this is another, man, I really wish these videos, I'm going to exit so I can show you guys these videos at the end here. But so this is our, what we call our bridal walk. So this would be where you would go to walk down the pergola. So the pergola space is very popular for weddings. So tons of weddings. And so we have this in what we have nicknamed our bridal walk, which really just takes you down to the pergola space and under kind of the original structure of the, I don't know that you necessarily call it an arbor, but the original kind of structure that walks you down and out to the pergola. And so this is just a grass path. There's camellias along this space as well. You could see that they had some, these are not original, but they did have benches and things that you could sit on. But that's just kind of the style of how everything was. So then oh, is it your turn?
No, not yet.
Okay, cool. Sorry. So those are just kind of some quick views of the garden there, and we'll get those videos to work when we exit. But one of the big notable historical things here is Minnie Evans. So Minnie Evans worked for the Jones family, and she worked at the Airlie house. Her husband, Julius, worked for Pembroke at Pembroke Park. And so they actually met and married, and they both lived here their entire lives. So if you haven't heard of Minnie Evans, Minnie worked in domestic service for the Joneses at the Airlie house. Julius worked as a coachman for Pembroke. And then they eventually worked for the Corbett family, who purchased the property after. And so she actually became a huge African-American folk artist. Her art is all over the world. And we have a very nice tribute to her, which is our bottle chapel. Again, Sarah's going to kind of touch on all of that stuff. But if you haven't been able to see her art, some of her art is at Cameron Art Museum. We don't have any originals here, but we do have examples of her art here. But her story is really interesting, and Sarah's going to get to that here in a few minutes. So Sarah spends her time developing this space. They have a daughter, Sadie, who eventually will own this property as well. And she marries John Russell Pope, the Popes. And he was the one who's credited with designing the Jefferson Memorial, which is kind of interesting. And they got married at Lebanon Chapel. So when Pembroke died, Sarah married Henry. So if you recall at the very beginning, Henry Walters, also in the railroad business, moved his headquarters down here to Wilmington, was great friends with all of them, eventually had moved in with them. And then when Pembroke died, Sarah ended up marrying Henry. So they were all living together. Pembroke died, and then she married Henry, which I think is kind of weird, but it's probably how things happen. And so the very bottom picture there is the original gate to Airlie. And so that structure is still, we still have that gate, although it's been recreated. Dumais, who was one of our artists one year, it was an iron, I believe it was Dumais. Either way, they had gotten it redone at one point. And so anyways, it's the original design of the gates down at the very front, which is kind of cool. And then in this photo here, this is Minnie here. And then this is, I believe, Albert Corbett, of the Corbett family, of course, that purchased next. So here's the interesting thing. So pretty much Sarah used this property entirely as kind of her play property to host people, to bring people in. It wasn't until this time frame that this is kind of where the Cape Fear Garden Club comes into play and things are founded. But here is where they actually opened the gardens to the public. And so they only opened it for 2 days in the year, and they opened it for 50 cents for people to come in and walk around the garden. So this is kind of ties into the Azalea Festival, really, if you think about the timing of it all. And so that was really the first time that people, other than the people that Sarah knew or invited to her property, kind of enjoyed the azaleas and the magnolias and the pines and the oaks, and enjoyed kind of the design of the space itself. Okay, so here is a better kind of picture of going down the pergola space. So this is that bridal walk, and then this little section right here is where those two little benches are. And then if you were to continue down, that's where you would go out and walk out to the pergola. So the pergola itself is these tiny little narrow steps, and they had brought in swans. So there, at one point there used to be hundreds of swans actually on this lake. And it's these tiny little thin steps. And the reason that was because they used to take boats out and on these little paddle boats and out and onto the lake. And at the time, it was really impolite for women to show their ankles. So they had these really shallow steps so that they could bring the boats up really close, not have to lift their dress up higher than their ankles, and then be able to get into this boat very politely and kindly, and then be able to float on the lake. And so the lake itself, if you've been here during spring bloom, you get the reflection of the azaleas popping off around the outside of the lake. And it was the same then, except you also had hundreds of swans in combination with that as well. It is worth noting, we used to have swans here. They are a non-native species to North Carolina. They were mute swans. And so that is an introduced species, but there is a small population of swans in our area. But what happened to our swans was one died, and then they do mate for life unless one dies, and they go and find another mate. And that's really what happened here. One had died, and then the other swan, the male swan, needed to go and find another mate. And so we haven't had swans come back since. Personally, I don't mind that, and that's because swans are really mean and they shoo off a lot of other species of birds. So I don't hate that they're not here, although I know people love them, and they're huge and very pretty, so I get that too. But we've seen different waterfowl come in that wouldn't usually have come here because of our swans. So it's give and a take, I guess, as well. Oh, now is it your turn?
Yeah.
All right, so I'm gonna let Sarah kind of take over for the second half, which is kind of Minnie's life, and then going into the Corbett family who owned the property next.
Cool. So going back to Minnie, as Alyssa had said, she was a domestic worker for the Jones family. And so in 1935, she was still working for the Jones family at that time. Minnie was very religious, and she had kind of a lot of visions and dreams. And so in 1935, on a Good Friday, she had kind of a vision or a dream of an angel telling her to draw or die. And so she picked up some materials. It was just kind of like a scrap of a paper bag. And she started to draw. And she had never had any kind of like formal artistic training or anything like that. She was just kind of drawing off of instinct and kind of based on the things she would see in her visions and dreams a lot of times. So this was kind of when she first starts drawing, and then she sort of takes a break and forgets about it for a while. And then a few years down the road, she picks up drawing again and really sticks with it. And so this next slide is just highlighting some of her work. And so a lot of the themes in her artwork, you can kind of see how she was inspired by working at the gardens. There's a lot of plants and flowers and butterflies and a lot of natural elements. And she was also definitely really heavily inspired by religion. And so you'll kind of see a lot of angels or sort of religious figures in her drawings. And she used a ton of symmetry and obviously very bold, bright colors. And a lot of these were just crayon drawings. Further down the line, she started getting into more like oils and things like that. And as Alyssa mentioned, some of her art is at the Cameron Art Museum, but her art is known worldwide. She is a world-known African-American folk artist. And so now we're here in the 1940s. Something notable that happened is Bradley Creek is closed to shellfishing because it's so polluted. So as you may or may not already know, our shellfish like oysters and clams and things like that are filter feeders. So in order to eat, they're basically sucking in and siphoning water through their bodies, and then they just kind of hold on to whatever little planktons and algae they happen to suck in with the water. And when the water is polluted, in addition to holding on to the plankton and the algae, their bodies are also holding on to the pollution that they take in. So the nice thing is they help to clean our waterways, but the not so nice thing is that they're not safe to eat because their bodies have held on to so much pollution. So Bradley Creek is close to shellfishing, and it's actually still close to shellfishing today. Sarah dies at age 84, and her daughter Sadie inherits Airlie. Sadie doesn't really seem to want to hold on to it for very long and ends up selling it to the Corbetts for $150,000. Can you imagine buying all of this waterfront property for only $150,000.
No.
And the Corbetts had more of a vision to have it be a space for the public to visit on a regular basis. And so in 1948, they open it to the public, and Minnie Evans is hired by them to run the front gate. And so she pretty much stays there working at the front gate almost until the end of her life. She actually, for a while, would sell her art at the front gate to people for 50 cents. A lot of locals who are older have memories of like speaking to Minnie or sitting on her lap. So she remained a really important part of the gardens for the rest of her life. And throughout kind of the 50s, the Corbetts were having to do some restoration around the garden, replanting a lot of azaleas. Hurricane Hazel hits and damages the Airlie house beyond repair. So all that we really have of the Airlie house here now is a model that people can look at. So eventually the house is dismantled and a new house is built on the same footprint. So this is a real estate photo of their property. And this is their home is still standing, and it's on the other side of the fence. So it's not a part of the current Airlie Gardens property, but it is really close still, and it's still owned by the Corbett family. It's been passed down. So this is another video that's not going to play, but we'll try to play all the videos at the end. This is our spring garden, which is in the kind of the back part of our current property, and so that's kind of what is the closest to the original Airlie house property. Our spring garden does have a fountain, and kind of around the perimeter there's some azaleas, and it is called the spring garden, apparently not because of the flowers blooming in spring, but because there is a water spring underneath of the garden. So for, from the 50s up until the 90s, the Corbetts are running the gardens. And in 1999, they are putting it up for sale. And because the Airlie property is right on Bradley Creek, it's really close to Wrightsville Beach, it's pretty valuable and definitely sought after. And so because of the Clean Water Management Trust Fund, the county is able to buy the property in order to keep it as a public green space instead of it getting bought by developers who are going to just put more, multi-million-dollar homes and docks and what have you. And this is really important for the health of Bradley Creek. So in Wilmington, in New Hanover County, there is a lot of development and development of non-pervious services, roads, sidewalks, buildings, really can have an effect on our stormwater and how it flows and the water quality in all of the areas where it flows into. And so having this green space basically gives a nice buffer between the pollutants and things that can come from the roads and the neighborhoods, and it gets sort of filtered through our, our soil and our plants and all of these things before it makes it into Bradley Creek. So New Hanover County acquiring this property is really helpful to the health of Bradley Creek. And then it also is really nice for the community because people can still visit it as a public space. And also the Environmental Education Department, which is Alyssa and myself now, it has not been us since 1999, is instituted for schools and the public. So public schools are able to take field trips here, and kids get really cool hands-on experiences with soil, with water quality, with plants, which I personally think is a really cool asset in New Hanover County. So this here is a view of our dock. And so this structure was added once the garden was purchased by New Hanover County. And so when you walk out on the dock, you're looking over Bradley Creek, and you can kind of see on the other side of Bradley Creek how it has been developed all the way up to the edge there. So with the other side having so much development on it, it's really nice to have a green space on our side.
Sorry, so actually it's kind of cool if you ever walk out onto the pier. It's really interesting because if you walk across the way, directly across from us is a marina, and that marina was built prior to either the city or the county ordinances and regulations for wetlands. So you can actually see the difference between where the marina was built up to and not having a buffer zone. And then if you look down towards some of the homes that are next to it, you're going to see how much farther set back those homes are, and you're going to see a green space. Now, pretty much all of them are going to have a retention wall of some kind built there, but you actually see that there's a requirement for buffer zones with wetlands. And so that's CAMA laws from state laws, and then even coming down into city and county regulations as well. Sorry, it's kind of interesting to see across the way there.
Yes. And then from our creek, or from our dock, it's helpful for our environmental education programs. It's a great place for us to show people some of our marsh wading birds. It's a cool place to educate kids about shellfish and how they're filter feeders and water quality and all of that good stuff. And so from 2000 to present, we're part of the New Hanover County Parks and Gardens Department. The Bottle Chapel and the Bottle Chapel Garden is erected in honor of Minnie Evans. And so that's that picture in the top right. And so it was built by local artist Virginia Wright Ferguson, and there's other pieces in the Bottle Chapel Gardens that were done by other local artists. So Dume Gorham did these cool metal angels, and there's an image of Minnie in her gatehouse that was done by Hiroshi Sayoshi. And so if you haven't gotten a chance to check out the Bottle Chapel, it is a really cool piece. It's made, the number is kind of disputed, but we'll say roughly 3,000 bottles that were collected by volunteers, a lot of raiding of the recycle bin at Wrightsville Beach in order to complete this project. And so Minnie Evans did not create any of the pieces that are in the Bottle Chapel Garden, but all of the pieces are kind of inspired by her style of work. So you'll see the angels and religious imagery, you'll see a lot of symmetry, a lot of bright colors, and things like that. And we started doing our Enchanted Airlie in the 2000s. And so that's, if you've never been, the garden is lit up for the holidays. You walk through. For a lot of people, it's a really cool tradition. And that you can see a little glimpse of that in the bottom right. And then our butterfly house and bug zoo are added. So that image in the bottom left is the butterfly house. It's really valuable to us as environmental educators. It really gives us an awesome opportunity to show kids a butterfly's life cycle, metamorphosis, host plants, really up close and personal. And it's also just like a really beautiful, tranquil space to go eat your lunch on the bench and just watch the butterflies. Our bug zoo is kind of a seasonal exhibit that we have inside, and it really has more frogs and lizards than bugs, but it's also, sorry, our bird,
we have a bird clock.
and it's almost done. Okay. Our Bug Zoo, like I said, it's another educational tool for us. So we kind of highlight local, mostly reptiles and amphibians. And so people can get a kind of up close and personal look at the creatures that they might find in their own backyard and learn kind of more about how to identify them. And so that's kind of where we're at today. Here's an image of the Bottle Chapel Garden. We're gonna exit out of this view and see if we can't get the videos to work a different way.
I don't want to, but I don't want to hold you guys up. So quick, so if you want to, I'm gonna stop sharing. I wasn't sure if anybody. I also wasn't sure what kind of time frame we're working with. Sue, I know it's almost 2:00, so I don't want to overrun you guys. We can certainly try and play some of those videos if you like, especially the Bottle Chapel one. If you'd like to see those.
Sure, why not give it a try?
All right, let's see if we can. I don't know why they won't play. Let's see. I wonder if I can do it just in a different mode. Or we have them downloaded, so we can certainly do it that way as well. I'm gonna try and do it from just this final.
No.
For some reason, if you're screen sharing, it doesn't allow you to play the media. So I don't know why. Okay, well then it's just more the reason for you guys to come and visit. So you can see these things up close and personal. I mean, we literally took those videos the other day. It was gorgeous. I mean, it's gorgeous outside. Of course, our temperature is going to change, but there's really no time of year when it's not sunny here that these things are just spectacular. So just like the views over the lake, the views at the Bottle Chapel, I mean, they really are pretty special when you think about the history of the garden itself. So that was like the world's most abbreviated. We could talk forever about the history because, to be frank, it's so confusing. The number of people that have owned these tracts of land that come through here is pretty crazy. And if you guys we ever do our group tours again, I would highly recommend maybe having a history tour here with one of our docents, because they love the history of the gardens itself, and they could talk forever about certain aspects. And they know even some more of the intricacies of the history than we do as well. I always learn something from them when I get to be on one of their tours. So I do see some questions in the chat, and we'll kind of hit them really quick. So super quick. Every part of the gardens here is pretty much accessible, with the exception of our offices space and our storage spaces. The grounds are free to walk. You can walk off of the paths and onto the lawns. Of course, not in the beds, which is pretty standard. And just kind of enjoy the whole space. We usually tell people, like, if you're going to walk the paths, it's about a mile or so in length, and to really enjoy it, like an hour and a half time frame, but if you're going to walk off and onto the lawns and just kind of relax and enjoy yourself and really look at things, give yourself a couple hours to really enjoy the space. But pretty much everything is accessible. If
the Bottle Chapel is not always open.
Yes.
That's the only thing.
Dumay actually did build us a gate for the front. It did used to be open. However, we had too many issues with people actually climbing the bottles, and the bottles breaking. So we had to put a gate on the front. So it's open infrequently. When we have volunteers, sometimes we have a volunteer that's stationed out there, and then we are able to have it be open. But other than that, it's not really open. So dealing with rabbits and deer, to be honest with you, we don't really have that problem too horribly much. And the reason being is just there's a gate around there's a fence around the whole thing, and then we border the water. I'm not saying the deer can't get in here and they can't jump the gate. We just really haven't had much issue with deer or rabbits or just kind of wildlife in general eating the plants. And I think that's mainly just because the property is gated and then we're bordering the creek itself. So that's kind of few and far between. And then I also think just in general, the deer here, like the deer population perhaps in New Hanover County versus the deer population probably in Brunswick County, is very different. I would imagine you guys have a much higher deer population than we do here in our small, highly populated and highly developed county versus Brunswick County. So I could see that being a much larger issue for you guys in Brunswick than it is here for folks in New Hanover County, or really kind of even Pender, pretty much any county but New Hanover. And I just think there's just so much limited space for deer to actually graze and browse and eat. So we don't have that issue so much. Some differences between Sasanqua and Japonica. Honestly, you guys probably know better than I do. Sasanqua is going to bloom first, and usually they have a smaller cluster of blooms, or just some smaller flowers. And then I believe the leaves on Sasanqua are a bit smaller. Does anybody have any other comments to add on that? Japonica blooms second to Sasanquas. If you do, please feel free. You probably know better than I do.
Okay. Does anyone else have any other questions?
Well, Japonica will be more of a tree form too, as opposed
Yeah.
to Sasanqua. I've had Japonicas with trunks on them about 6-7 inches across.
Oh, wow. That's
Yeah.
Have you guys ever grafted any of your camellias?
I have not.
I've seen people do that before. The church was doing it. They were grafting some of the camellias. And so they were taking scrapings of the branches, and they were, honestly, Sarah and I noticed, they're like, what are we doing? Are they trapping like some type of insect on but they were grafting the camellias to replant, which was kind of interesting. Anybody else?
Okay, well then I will thank you, Alyssa and Sarah. That was a bonus. I didn't know you were going to be a co-host, but we enjoyed both of you tremendously. And I certainly hope that the members of the Garden Club who haven't been to Airlie recently will get out and enjoy the camellias. For those of you who can't quite get there, I have a few blooming in my yard, so come on over whenever you feel like it and take a look.
Yeah.
But again, thank you so much. It was wonderful. I think we will probably be talking to Lily and Susan about making a trip out to the gardens. At least we can do that socially distanced, wearing masks and get together as a group.
Yeah, absolutely. It's the best place, and really people have this time have really viewed it as like a nice safe haven to get away and be outside and enjoy themselves, be on the beach and what have you. So it's been really enjoyable to see people be able to be out here, which is nice. So come out, enjoy it, stop in and say hi.
We will, absolutely. Thank you so much.
Thank you. We appreciate you guys having us.
Thank you. Ladies, I'm going